All right, well, we got one more call here that I want to get to before we wrap things up tonight. This is Josh in Virginia. Josh, what's going on?
Hey, Dan. Good to talk to you.
Hey, what's up, dude? How's it going?
How you been?
I've been good. I got my hair cut today, and it was noticed on the show, which is really nice. I'm here with ExCultBaby, and getting a lot of love tonight.
Yeah,
so
ExCultBaby. It's nice to meet you. I've been listening.
Nice to meet you too.
Cool. Well, what's on your mind, Josh?
I just wanted to bring up a topic, and I guess my question is for both of you. What are your thoughts on sex working in the United States?
Ooh, good question.
Ooh.
So I guess I'll start with this one first. Matt Dillahunty.
I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, Matt Dillahunty has talked a lot about this actually, and I think the more I've heard him talk about it, the more it's kind of
rubbed off.
Yeah. I think he has some he words things in ways that are really appealing to me sometimes. I think historically it's always been this kind of stigmatized thing. I think that if we had the institutions in place, however, to make it safe and to make it legal, I think it should be an option for people only because it's going to happen anyway, right? And I feel the same way about certain other kinds of things too, like people talking about like weed, for example, like. Look, guys, like people have been smoking weed for a long time, it's statistically people who are smoking weed are not having the same kinds of health problems and stuff that people who are drinking alcohol and stuff like. I mean, I get they're different kinds of problems, right? And it's not exactly fair to make the comparison offhanded like I am right now, but like. People have been doing it, and it's been fine. The biggest trouble we've had with weed is people getting caught and then getting locked up for years, and people having scares with this kinds of stuff, and it's had negative harms. And I think we've seen the same thing with the sex work industry. I think it's weird because, I know that there's even church organizations and stuff that are trying to crack down on this kind of stuff to help, and it's under the guise of sex trafficking, right? Well, yeah, everybody wants to stop sex trafficking. But sometimes there's an overreach in these kinds of programs, and that they're just, stopping people who are trying to, make a living doing this kind of thing. And I think it's sad, and I think it's unnecessary. I think that we have the power to make institutions like that, safe and legal for people. And I'd be.
I think it kind of does have a connection to. Not necessarily all religions, but there are definitely religious groups that how they approach this is to talk about it as a sin, and that they have that right, and I get that, but it's kind of if you're wording it that way, you're kind of predicating that it's something that's evil, not approaching it as something kind of objective, something that's not necessarily good or evil. It can be, it can have a higher susceptibility to violence. This is totally true, but there's also other industries that have similar susceptibilities to violence. I think the example that a lot of people have used with me has to do with looking at it as labor. And then there's actually a lot of ways that you can move forward, and a lot of little things that create problems end up kind of not being as much of a problem if you look at it under that guise of it just being labor, because not only does that come with all of the different institutional things that you were describing, but conceptually it's easier for people to understand in terms of, it's legal to run a masseuse shop, but you still can't have child labor. You still can't pay your masseuses under a certain wage. You still can't abuse them. You can't beat them. You can't, if it was legalized, there is truth to the whole, it would be easier in reality for the people that are working in that industry to kind of work together and I feel like it's more of you need to put power into the hands of the people that we're calling victims.
Yes,
right.
I agree.
Because what I even know in my own personal area, I know people who had money taken that wasn't even gained from sex working, but because they were caught engaging in it, all of the cash that was in their house, some of which was actually their mother's, and was like basically, some of the people in this area, they're very old fashioned, and so she kept her money like in this mattress. So the police ended up like giving her a heavier sentence. And also they keep all of the money that you make, where that's kind of my flaw in it too, is you're calling them victims, but you take their wages then.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's also frustrating. And it makes sense because under the phrasing of it's a sin, and so the act of doing it is wrong, they can then get away with saying, but we can't give them the money back because then it's not a deterrent and they'll go out and do it again because they think it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I come in saying there actually is this direct connection, this direct problem with observing it as a sin.
Sure. Because
then you can literally go forward from that saying, no, this is evil de facto, and even if we're hurting the person that's doing it, it's I'm saying it's a masseuse thing, they're saying it's PCP. It's a little bit different, and the whole sex trafficking thing definitely gets.
I definitely have more to say about that sin thing, but I want ExCultBaby to kind of give her take on this.
Yeah.
So this is something that I've thought about. I think that things would definitely be better if it was legal, because I don't think that it should be illegal. I really don't see any reason why it should be illegal unless it's based on, like you were saying, the religious concept of sin. Outside of that, there really doesn't seem to be any reason for it to be illegal. But there are a lot of problems in the industry as it currently exists, and even in places where it's legal, there are a lot of problems with it. I read an article once about a woman who was a sex worker in a place where it was legal, discussing her experiences and how it was still pretty messed up in a lot of ways. I think that if it was legal at the ground level for everybody, like at a federal level, then there would be a lot more rules and regulations in place. They could unionize, etc., like what you were saying about labor. All of that stuff would really help. But yeah, in the end, there's no real reason for it to be illegal except for there being problems in the industry, which would be fine if it was actually regulated by the law.
Yeah. And
I don't even know that full legalization, it wouldn't have to result in that, but most people I've talked to on this, their fear is that it would result in the brothel model where, kind of like with other things, if marijuana becomes a multi-$100 billion corporate industry that's like making massive profits, that pisses me off because I like marijuana, but it's not going to bother me on the same level as like 50,000 women having their labor value devalued by the fact that now a corporation owns all of your labor.
Yes.
Right, which is why I think
that would be terrible. That would be worse.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's why I think right off the bat, I think that if prostitution was legal, they would just have to unionize immediately.
Right. So let's talk about this too, because
absolutely,
like 99% of people who become prostitutes, they don't do it because they like sex, right? They don't do it because this is a lust thing for them. This is a need for a lot of people. This is an economic need. I mean, I get that there are people who do it because they enjoy it, but like, I imagine it's pretty similar to people who I've read an interview from a porn star one time saying like, yeah, nobody gets into the porn industry on a good day. That really struck a chord with me. And and this isn't, by the way, to belittle people who do prostitution because like they're into it and that's kind of a thing. Like I say more power to you, but people get into these industries because of a lack of economic, power in their lives. In a lot of cases, they don't have the means to do other things. Maybe. People, they're trying to support kids. They're trying to support a family. And that's a lot more common than the media trope that we see in a lot of movies when we're talking about prostitutes, where they're kind of like these women who are typically single and like, living by themselves.
At
the
same time, though, do you think that if it were legal and it became somewhat destigmatized, that there would be a lot more people who are going into it because it's a field of work that they enjoy and excel at?
That could be, but,
I would like to think it would somewhat decouple the concept of a lot of people, I think, put sex on a pedestal, and I don't people will misunderstand me when I say this, but in some ways, I really would want to normalize sex. Not in the sense that I think people should be doing it out in public or anything like that, and not like those awful like libertarian types that are like, have sex in front of your kids to show them what it is. But rather very slow, almost like in the German system that and I don't like a lot of Germany's systems. They're flawed in some ways. It's a long conversation, but sort of getting generations to have a little bit more of understanding of each other and not necessarily thinking of each other as like, you know, I feel like if you put somebody up on a pedestal, that's what results in this whole victim blaming, slut shaming kind of atmosphere where part of the problem is that, you know, people have made the joke about like, if a guy goes around and has sex with a lot of people, it doesn't matter. And if a girl goes around and has sex with a lot of people, it gets her shamed. I don't think it's that all sex should stop. I just think that we should stop thinking of someone having multiple partners throughout like their teenage years as like, oh my God, you're awful. You know, that you want to normalize sex specifically because then hopefully you would even maybe get some of the culture to not be hyper focused on sex. I know conservatives that are super, super Christian that agree on at least the topic of like that normalizing sex in the way that I'm describing would cause there to be less value in even the advertising. You know, that whole issue of like, oh, I don't like the advertising being full of sex and selling sex. If you really wanted to do that and kind of get that to stop, it's almost the same thing as like the drugs coming into the country type thing, where it's like, if you really wanted to stop this, history has shown that it's usually faster to make the thing not fun, in the sense of make the thing not this, you know, massive thing, this, you know, flying purple dragon that everybody is chasing. You know, even the concept of how a lot of young people that I even talk to, a lot of these kids that are like 17 or 18, they're like disappointed in their relationships because what they expect out of sex is like
they're not having porn star sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's yeah, it really is this like because there's so many benefits in my opinion to normalizing even just conversations about sex. You know, it's not just that it makes it, I think, easier to address sexual assault and harassment problems in the workplace. It's easier to have open conversations with your children. I'm the kind of person that as my kids get older, I would rather them tell me if they were going to smoke. I would rather them tell me if they're going to have sex. I don't want a repeat of what I saw happening with my childhood where like 75% of my life was just, you know, mine, you know, and I think there's benefit to it, but also I think in the future, I'm hopeful that our generation, not all of us, obviously, but like the parenting beyond belief thing, where it's like this whole idea of we're going to have a much stronger connection to our kids because we're not leading them. You know, we're not reading to them from a book that tells us everything to do and that our parents read us and that their parents read them. And, you know, and I like to think that by doing things this new way that you actually end up like having communication from your kids during the most difficult time of growing up, during a time where many of the different things, especially here in America, are really dangerous. You know, people do get involved in the dangerous aspects of drug life and you know, people drop off. They end up dying of heroin overdoses or some other form of opioid. And yeah, a lot of this problem, it all sounds very Christian, actually. It's a problem of families not communicating. And I think the bigger reason my families aren't communicating it's not because of sin and a decay of moral values. It's that, you know, a whole generation of kids is basically not getting help from their parents because their parents don't agree with their sexual orientation, their lifestyle, or politics, all these different issues that, you know, I've worked really hard to keep a relationship to my parents that are both like really hardcore Trump voters.
So Josh, I want to go back because ExCultBaby asked me a question, and her question I believe was, would I be afraid that more people would go into prostitution after it was legal? It's a really interesting question.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Is it a good thing or a bad thing? So, like, I think the danger that we think of it maybe as a bad thing because right now prostitution is a dangerous work, and so like more people doing more dangerous work is not bad. But if we were saying that with the caveat of, well, we're making it legal so that we can make it safer for people, then I would say maybe that's not as much of a problem. And also, this is a statistic that surprises people. I believe this is from Pew, but actually the younger generations, and we're talking like millennials and onwards, are actually having sex with people less often than previous generations, like less sexual.
Probably because it's less stigmatized.
Well, probably because it's less sex, but also because
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, and this is so well. First, I find that fascinating because that's directly the opposite of every single narrative I've ever heard growing up in church. But also, it's because
we're supposed to be eating avocado toast and doing nothing with our lives.
And I think we've seen the same place. Yeah, like I think we've seen similar things with like it's the statistics I've seen, and maybe this is wrong because this is a while ago when I saw this, but like when weed was getting more legal in Colorado and like Canada and stuff, like were there more people becoming weed smokers after that legalization was saying? And I what I want to say was I remember that the differences were almost kind of negligible. But I think it's one of those things where it's like people who really want to seek out having relationships with prostitutes and engaging in that stuff are kind of going to do it. And it's like, well, if they're going to do it and that's kind of the reality that we live in, I would want to make that as safe and as, accessible. It's the same thing with abortions, right? Like we talk about abortions sometimes. It seems like the countries that have more access to safe abortions actually have a less number of abortions. And I imagine maybe that would be the same way with legal prostitution. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but could be.
Here's the thought.
Yeah.
If prostitution was legal and sex was...
Let's say sex work.
If sex work was legal and sex in general was less stigmatized, would people even necessarily need sex workers as much?
Yeah.
Would they have healthier sex lives all on their own if sex wasn't so stigmatized?
You're probably, I mean, they probably would have better sex with people they knew already. You wouldn't have to pay for it.
Demand might go down.
I don't remember the exact statistic, but there was a statistic that showed that this really high percentage, they polled like, I think, 3,000 people, which is actually a fairly large poll if you know about like pollster data. And the majority of the people, not the majority, but a much larger number than they expected. It was something like 25 or 30% of people had said that they actually learned the majority of what they know about sex from a sex worker. So there's even this whole thing of how like prior to engaging in certain amounts of sex education in the public school system, we were literally having a certain percentage of our population be taught about sex by sex workers.
Wow.
Maybe
they were literally doing our jobs in terms of educating people.
I could see that.
Yeah, because you wouldn't be taught in school, you wouldn't be taught by your parents because it was icky, so you ended up with your first, the joke of your dad taking you to like a strip club or to a brothel, for your first time.
Now the kids are learning about it from role-playing on Discord servers, so.
But if sex work is legalized, that could be a whole new branch of sex work, is like, young people or whatever age people really, their introduction to sex, how to do
sex work is
X,
a lot
Y,
more
Z
than
better. That could be a whole new branch that opens up. It's like hands-on sex education.
Yeah, and people seem to forget, sex, being paid to have sex with somebody is legal already if you have a camera. Right?
That is true.
If it's for porn,
they could have those classes and just make them and just sell it as pornography.
Yeah, like that's a that's a thing that's already been happening, and people.
Yeah, I know about that.
People don't have that paradigm. But anyway, we're kind of running long right now with this show. But Josh, this was a fascinating conversation. We have never talked about that on this show before, and I'm glad. I think that's the first.
Yeah, first.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing in something new and fresh, and I look forward to seeing whatever freshness you bring next time.
If you're not a little uncomfortable, you're not trying hard enough.
Hey, I like that. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks again, Josh.
Bye, Josh.
Yeah.